Authors want to sell more books. But it's hard if you're not visible. We can help. Claim your instant access to the 10 tips for free book promos from the Bold Authors Network at fictionwriterspodcast.com/boldauthors now. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where you will discover tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Here you'll find new energy, new perspectives, new resources, and new ideas that will spark your creativity into a blaze of brilliance. It's easier than you think. Be sure you visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get out your notebook, tune in, and let's get started.
Have you ever read a historical novel about mid-century history? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast. Tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Today, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Kay Smith-Blum, a former fashionista and Seattle School Board president. She's a fan of mid-20th century history. The recent upheaval over leaking radioactive waste tanks at the Hanford nuclear site compelled her to write Tangles, which was named Book of the Year by the Literary Globe Book Awards and Best Debut Fiction by the American Writing Awards 2024. Smith-Blum is a sunrise writer. She's lived in Seattle for 4 decades. She works out her writer's block in her son's gardens and at the nearest lap pool. Welcome, Kay.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, this is interesting because mid-century is something I have not talked to anybody about yet. So what are the years that would qualify as mid-19th century?
So it's essentially the Cold War years, but a broader sense for mid-century might be the 40s, from the beginning of the 40s through the 60s, which is technically historical because anything 50 years or back is historical, technically. My tale, Tangles, takes place mainly during the Cold War. So there's 2 timelines, and one's in the late 40s through 1951. And then the second narrative or timeline is set in 1963 and 64. So it spans those Cold War years.
Okay, well, that's interesting. It's so interesting that my early life is now considered historical fiction.
Exactly, right?
It's kind of freaky, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I have pals who are writing, about the crazy late 60s and early 70s, particularly in the music scene. I think with, Taylor Reid's, just bursting onto the scene, with Daisy, the series. Yeah. I think that what we just considered, well, yeah, we kind of went through that life. We're now historical.
We really are. We actually really are. Yeah. So this would be the time setting for the TV series Suits.
Yes. Yes. In a way. Yes, it would be. And I'm trying to think of some other relevant TV shows. They actually did a TV show on Hanford Nuclear and Los Alamos. It was on TV, I believe, in 2007, 2008. Alex Wellerstein, one of my resources when I was writing the novel, actually consulted for that TV show. And it was set during the early part of the development of the nuclear bomb, but then continued into the Cold War years. So, yeah. And it was very reminiscent. That TV series was very reminiscent of a lot of the attitudes and how women were regarded in that time period.
Yeah, I recently got hooked into an old TV detective show called Ironside. And
yeah.
I'm a mystery writer, so those kind of detective shows, I'm always, fascinated by them. I haven't seen that one for years, so I thought, well, I'll just see. Maybe I'll get a few ideas. And I was just so dismayed by the attitude toward women and some of the other things that were in there that was just part of daily life. And I remember those days
Right.
And it was just not even considered anything different. But now I'm appalled. I'm shocked and appalled.
Right. It's so interesting because my second manuscript, Tangles, was actually my third manuscript, my first published novel. But my second manuscript is set during a similar timeline, but mainly the 60s. And I refer to Ironside as a part of the authenticity of the novel. I refer to Ironsides, and my protagonist is really annoyed because they had canceled Perry Mason, which then they rolled into the Ironsides thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just 1 year later, Ironside came out.
Exactly. But, you mentioned that I'm fascinated with 20th century history. I'm actually a bit obsessed with debunking the tropes around what was actually going on in the 20th century. And so what you say about women and how limited they were in terms of their rights. And it really, in the 50s, there were still women that had to get their husband's permission to withdraw from a joint checking account or get a car loan, or had to have their husband co-sign if they needed a credit card. So I really enjoy kind of digging into those details. It helps with the authenticity of any tale during that time period, but debunking those tropes around we weren't all living in Ozzie and Harriet life.
No, not at all. Not at all. On Ironside in specific, I was noticing that, there are 3 people on the team. There are 2 men and 1 woman, and she's the one cooking, serving coffee. She's a police officer. They're actually sitting there working on a case, but she's serving dinner.
What? Exactly. And in my tale, because I have a female and a male protagonist, but in my tale, Mary, the female protagonist, is a secretary of the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And when she comes home, even though she's worked a full day, and her husband is also working at Hanford, and he's the company spokesperson. So a probably less taxing in many ways job. And when she comes home, she's absolutely expected to get dinner on the table.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. So, wow, that's so interesting because I'm just now watching it and I did not have any idea that this would come up in our conversation. I love the synchronicities. So what brought you to focus on historical fiction?
I've always been a history lover. I thought about majoring in history when I went to college because I've always been really fascinated with it. I think that fascination and that love of history was really rooted when I had Max Fisher as a middle school teacher. And he was teaching us American history as well as Texas state history. And he had this very dramatic approach to teaching us history. So he would act out things. I mean, I still remember his lecture on Custer's Last Stand, where he told us the truth about it, right? As opposed to it being this glorified thing. And his presentation of history and making it thrilling made me realize that history really is pretty thrilling. But rarely do we read historical fiction that feels that visceral or feels thrilling. There are some exceptions, but as part of the reason that I think many of the reviewers for my book have said this doesn't feel like the historical history I've read lately. It feels like a lot more. And that really makes me know that I've really hit the mark, because I wanted to really make that reader feel like they were rooted in the time and the story.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's very interesting. I started out writing historical fiction. And yeah, the Old West. My stories were set in the Old West. So I've loved history, forever. I had a high school, college teacher who did history like that. You'd sit there enthralled and the hour would go by and you wake up and go, where'd the hour go?
Exactly.
Yes. So what makes your work different from other historical fiction authors?
So I would say that when I wrote my first 2 manuscripts, I was definitely concerned with having a more literary approach to it. and a lot more of a deep dive into the character. And rather than centering a historical fiction tale around someone who was actually well known, or in some cases famous, or exactly around a really well known historical event, which a lot of books of historical fiction do. In fact, there are publishers that actually kind of require you to write the book around a well-known person or an extremely well-known event. What I wanted to do, though, is I really wanted to show how these historical happenings, whether it be one event or a series of events, particularly in the Cold War time period, how those actually affected just the you and me everyday citizen. What did the bystander think about that? Did they even think about it? Like when they read a newspaper headline, how did it affect them? Did it change anything that they did in their day-to-day lives? That was really interesting to me. And so with Tangles, while I do mention a couple of folks like Colonel Matthias, who actually was in charge of the Army and the Engineering Corps that actually built Hanford within a year and a half, which was an unbelievable feat. I mention him, but he is just a very minor player in terms of the actual story. And the story is really centered around everyday folks who were working or living around the Hanford nuclear reservation. And then in the second timeline, one of those folks in the first timeline is an adolescent or teenage boy, and then he grows up and becomes a scientist. And by 1963, he's starting to really question what happened during the birth of the nuclear age and how it may or may not have affected the health of the region and everyone who lived in it.
Is that what caused you to pick that location? Was about nuclear
waste and everything that has occurred. So Hanford Nuclear Reservation is the largest environmental disaster in the Western Hemisphere. And it's the most expensive environmental cleanup in history. We're knocking at the door of hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone into the cleanup, and it is nowhere near solved or done by any stretch of the imagination. They have 56 million gallons of nuclear waste that exist in tanks in this 300,000 acre reservation, which at one point housed 11 nuclear reactors. And they dumped a lot of that irradiated material into the land and the Columbia River and the air. And it was all kept secret because, we had a war to win in World War II. And then we rolled from World War II right into the Cold War and the nuclear arms race. So everything that happened at Hanford, at Los Alamos, at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which was the other plutonium processing plant, was kept classified for decades. And even though they documented every single release, every single accident, every single calculated release, they didn't tell the public about it until the public was able, through the Freedom of Information Act, get those classified documents. And that was in the 90s. So that 4 decades of sheer devastation to the land and to the water and to the air in eastern Washington and beyond, because the Columbia River, as you know, flows. It's the major lifeblood of eastern down into southeastern Oregon as well, and into the Pacific Ocean. Even though it was affecting a huge amount of plant and wildlife and livestock and farmers and anyone who lived nearby, they didn't issue warnings of any kind until classified documents were released and people blew the whistle.
What year was this disaster?
So it started when they began building the plant in 1943 because they were simultaneously building reactors and figuring out how to build the reactors with simultaneously figuring out how to process plutonium and specifically how to jacket the plutonium so that it wouldn't explode or have a chain reaction before it got inside the bomb mechanism that was being assembled in Los Alamos. So they literally shipped the plutonium jackets, for a want of a better term, down to Los Alamos to be loaded into the bombs that were then dropped to end World War II. And then also began being tested in the above ground testing in the Marshall Islands, Bikini Atoll, and the devastation that reaped across the Pacific Ocean and 3 different jet streams coming across the United States was just additional nuclear fallout in conjunction with what had already been released at both Hanford and Los Alamos during the early period. So it started nuclear production started in 1944. They built the first reactors within about a year to 18-month period, and they revved them up to begin production in late 1944. And then as we moved through the Cold War, they built more and more reactors because they felt like they needed to keep up with the Russians and whoever else was potentially going to have nuclear bombs. And so it became a race that we know of.
Yes. I saw a statistic somewhere that they were dropping a nuclear bomb every so many minutes around the globe during those days. They were testing, and I can't even imagine.
Yeah, between the Russians and us. And then Kennedy finally stopped the above ground testing, and that has everything to do with the Truth Fairy study, which was dentists in the Midwest because of the fallout specifically from Hanford and the Bikini Atoll above ground tests. They started finding strontium in children's teeth. And they got really curious, and it turned into a study, and they started soliciting parents all over the United States to send their children's baby teeth in. And they were able to determine literally where the fallout streams had flowed with the wind across the United States. And what's really interesting about that is they are able now, because they still have all of the original teeth with all of the original names of children back in the 60s and early 70s. And those children are now adults, mostly retired citizens in their late 60s and 70s now. And they can track them down. And so they're hoping to get a grant to do that work and be able to go to those folks and say, so you had strontium in your teeth as a baby, do you have any ailments now? And if they can create this thread between the children having ingested strontium, which is a bone, strontium goes into your bones, including your teeth, and see if they have developed cancers or, autoimmune diseases of any kind. That would be so valuable because we already have like a Radiation Workers Act, but there's never been anything done for the bystanders who were right there in the same fallout streams as the workers.
Yeah. Wow. So interesting. Yeah, I can see how you could get really sucked into all of this.
Yeah. But what I didn't tell you is the tanks started leaking. And once the tanks started leaking, then they were the headlines again. And I had known about Hanford from my days when I ran for school board, because one of the major activists around the cleanup in 2009, when I was running for school board, was also running for state legislature. And he educated me about Hanford and about what was going on. And this is back in 2009. And so I was very much aware of the problems at Hanford, but you know how you kind of put a pin and stuff. And then suddenly I'm seeing these headlines. And then oddly, I ran into 2 friends who grew up in the Tri-City region, which is where Richland, the company town that the government built for Hanford workers, it's Richland, Pasco, and Kennewick. Those are the Tri-Cities in Eastern Washington that surround the Hanford Reservation. And they both grew up in the Tri-Cities, and they started telling me about the area. And then I was like, what? So that's what everyone called Hanford, the area. Very ominous. So down the rabbit hole of research I went.
Yes. Wow. So is it in Nevada? That's Area 51 where nobody's allowed, it's another top secret area.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. Martian
Yeah.
right?
Watch out for that word. Area.
Yeah, exactly. The area.
The area, yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your writing journey. This is Tangles is your first published fiction book.
Right.
So how did that happen? You have a traditional publisher or did you do something else?
No, I have a traditional publisher. It's a small publisher, Black Rose Writing, and they're actually located between Austin and San Antonio in Texas. And they have a stable of wonderful authors. I've fallen into the most incredible community of authors, very supportive and talented group. But I started out writing my birth mother's story in 2016 when we sold our family business. Like I said, I was a fashionista. We had a high-end fashion store in Seattle for almost 40 years. And when we sold our company in 2016, which was a miracle that we sold a retail business in 2016, the timing could not have been better. We were both offered various consultant jobs by folks that we knew in the retail industry and the wholesale industry. And I said, no, I'm going to write because I've been wanting to write my birth mother's story after finding my birth family in the 90s. So I spent several years doing that. Never felt like I got it right. Rewrote the manuscript 1,000 times, queried it to 50 some odd agents, got no bites. And in the midst of writing that story, I found out about a second story in Texas, the one I was just referring to that I used the Ironside reference to. And it was about some very strong female lawyers and judges that were really iconic and pivotal in women's rights in Texas. So I started pinning that story and felt like it was really good. And started querying it, feeling really strong about it. And just really was getting a lot of feedback. Oh, I love this story, but it's just not quite right for me. Or what a great tale, but it doesn't really match with my list. And you can't imagine how frustrating it is when somebody tells you you've written a great story or they love your writing style or I'm in love with this protagonist, but it's just not quite right for my list. And it was about that time because I was really all in querying my second manuscript. It was about that time that the headlines started appearing about Hanford. And then I ran into these two friends and I just got this feeling that I needed to be doing something with that. And it started as a short story. And then it very quickly became something else once I started listening to oral history. And I spent on this, in all of my books, all three of them, the two that are not published and this one, I spent at least a year just in research. But in the other two, I spent, multiple years developing the manuscripts. My first one, I spent 5 years developing the manuscript and rewriting it in different POVs, et cetera. The second one, I spent almost 3 years. So, fast forward, now I'm to 2022 and I still haven't published a book. And I'm getting this idea about this and I'm thinking to myself, how you talk to yourself as a writer? Okay, wait, shouldn't I just stick with it? Have one lover at a time. Shouldn't I just stick with this second manuscript? And then something in the back of your brain is just tugging at you on this other story. And I just finally succumbed and started writing it. And this book, maybe the third time's the charm, I don't know. But this book wrote itself very quickly after I got all the research under my belt. And so I researched for about 9 months, started talking to experts in the field, lots and lots and lots of experts that I needed to have much more knowledge about their fields of work in nuclear health, nuclear physicists, nuclear medicine, nuclear research, et cetera, before I could really write an authentic manuscript from the past. Interesting.
Yeah. So let's just put a pin in that right now for a minute to say, if you have an idea that won't let you go, you're not making it up. There's something there. And just really quickly, my Christie Award-winning book, Reaping the Whirlwind, I attended a seminar, and the teacher, just as an aside, said the Scopes evolution trial was a complete sham. It was a total put on, and nothing you believe about it is true. And he went on and never said another word about it. It was only like 10 seconds, but it went into my head and I couldn't put it down. And I went and did 2 years of research and all that, just like what you said. That book came out and won the Christie Award.
Wow.
It was nothing like anything I'd ever written.
Right.
Totally off track from anything else that I'd ever done. So those of you listening, listen.
Listen to your guts, listen to your intuitive thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something to that.
Yeah. And didn't you find that the book just sort of wrote itself?
It did. I created a fiction serial killer in town during the trial. And that was kind of like that was an example of what this subject is about. What if it goes wrong, kind of thing. Right. But also because it's a trial, it was pretty boring. Once I got the trial transcripts and stuff, right, I was like, man, I got to have something to spice this up. This is not, not going to do it. So yeah, I did have a challenge with a serial killer. I think this person killed like 6 people in the course of the book. So I had to come up with that. But yeah, it won the Christie Award.
Wow.
Changed my whole career. Everything in my life changed when I won the Christie Award. Yeah.
That's terrific. Good for you.
So what would you suggest for people who are just starting?
Take as many craft classes as you can. I looking back on my journey, if I'd taken more craft classes and really worked with a credible developmental editor on my first manuscript, I probably could have gotten that published. It has all the right elements of a really fascinating and, as you say, unputdownable story, but I just didn't craft it that well. I think craft classes and take craft classes on the same topic from different people, because you get different perspectives. I remember when I started submitting to literary journals, I was constantly taking craft classes on how to write flash fiction, how to write short stories. It was pivotal in terms of my novels becoming so much better, so much more authentic, so much more to the point, no wasted words.
Well, that's a big one there.
That's a big one. And unfortunately, most folks don't really adhere to those quote rules. And I think it really isn't. Some people will say, well, that's just her style. She writes that way. She's wordy. Well, is it? Or is it just that she hasn't really started to learn how to craft a story that's compelling? There's a reason certain stories win a Christie Award or win an American Writing Award or win, a Global Impact Award or win the Global Lit Prize. They have to be compelling stories. And if you have too many words saying one thing, it's kind of like when somebody's talking and they go on and on like I am right now. You tend to shut them out after a certain amount, right? Less is better. Less is more.
Absolutely. I call it like when you're cooking and you're making a reduction sauce and you have to boil it down halfway before the flavors really pop. If you serve it without boiling it down, it's diluted. It doesn't taste as good, but you make that reduction and all of a sudden it's got punch. The same
Right.
thing. Yeah.
It is. Exactly.
When
Less
I'm
is-
editing, probably 80% of the edits I make is crossing off needless words.
Yes, exactly. I enjoy beta reading for a lot of author pals, and one of my favorite writing pals sent me a book that was his it was not a sequel, it was the prequel to 3 other books that he had already written within a thriller category with the same protagonist. And so I said, do you want me to do some hard edits where I feel like, stuff you don't need necessarily, or if you're giving information, because I'd read the other 3 thrillers, and I said, or you're giving too much information because you're going to cover that in the next book or the next book or the next book, right? And he said, sure. And I ended up editing out 8,000 words. and he was all in, like, yes, right. And then when he told his developmental editor that I had edited out, I had suggested another 8,000 words be cut, she was like, how could that possibly be? And I thought,
Yeah, there's something about the quality of the editor in that
right.
case. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not very often I have a conversation with someone on this level, I have to tell you.
Exactly. But I think it's a journey.
Yes.
And I think we all learn how to find that sweet spot for our writing. And it took me 3 tales, but I feel like I really have found it. And now, in going back and editing and rewriting my second manuscript, which I'm hoping will be my second published book, I find that I'm much more demanding of my writing than I was when I wrote that.
Absolutely. It is. It took me 14 years to get published.
Yeah.
I started when I was 24. My first book came out when I was 38. So I understand completely. And if you're here and you're listening and you've been writing and scrapping stuff and starting again, just keep on trying, because you're teaching yourself. This whole process. It's not easy, but
Right.
you can get there.
Right. I totally agree. It's a process, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That brings us to the question, why do you do it? Why do you write? Are you writing because you want to have fame and fortune?
No. I think every writer, if they're realistic, realizes that you might achieve a little bit of fame and maybe a small amount of fortune, but probably not. and fame is fleeting, right?
Yes, it absolutely is.
Yeah, I had an exchange with another writer who had endorsed my book. I've been so fortunate to have some best-selling authors endorse my tale, and they were saying, really enjoy the ride. It's you're just going to have so much fun. And I said, well, at least I'm experienced enough to know that there is a time limit on the ride.
Yes. Yes, I've gotten to the point. I have 46 published titles. I've gotten to the point where the process is my joy, and holding the book in my hands is the icing on the cake. But the cake is actually the fact that I love to write. So yes.
You find that it centers you, because I feel like if I don't get up in the morning and write, even if it's just for a half an hour or an hour, I feel a little disjointed the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very centering process for me.
Yes, it is. And when I'm in flow, the world goes away, time goes away. I look up 4 hours has passed. I just love it.
Yeah.
Just love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us how to get your book.
So I'm on every website you can imagine. I have, if you go to my website, www.kaysmith-blum.com, you'll see all the different choices, but I'm on every platform you can possibly think of out there in the universe. So any major bookseller can order it if they don't have it in stock. I'm slowly, if you're in the state of Washington, I've got multiple bookstores that are stocking it. And I'm slowly kind of making inroads in a multitude of libraries, which I'm very excited about. My aunt was a librarian, so I've been really thrilled to see that librarians are picking up Tangles for their collections. And I'll be doing a lot of library talks, and all of those talks will be supported by booksellers in various cities across the United States. I'll be in Park City next week during Sundance and doing a Barnes & Noble signing. So if you're from the city, I'll be there next week on the 29th. And beyond that, I'll be back in Seattle doing signings at Barnes & Noble and multiple Seattle area libraries. And then I'll also be in California, and I'll start doing libraries in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert area in March. I'll be in Houston in April. So there'll be a lot of different ways to find me, hear more about the book. But there's an awful lot of information on my website and connections to where you can purchase.
Yes, and that link will be in the show notes, wherever this podcast, wherever you're listening, show notes has it. And so go over there. Tangles by Kay Smith-Blum. Kay, this has been amazing. What a fun conversation.
I so appreciate you having me. It's just so much fun to talk about writing, and it really is all about the journey and the enjoyment of it. So it's really fun to talk with another author who feels the same way.
And who loves historicals. Yeah, that too. There's so much we can learn and so many secrets we can discover. When we dig down.
And in Tangles, there's a plethora of secrets.
Yes, it sounds like it. I would love to dig into that myself. So thank you so much, Kay, for spending time with us today.
Thanks again.
And thank you for being with us. See you next time. Bye now.
Thank you for tuning into the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where we share tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Remember to visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Fiction Writers Podcast.